Okay, board members, next we are moving to item 6. Charter satellite requests. AAG Michelle Buse will introduce this topic. Is Member Buse ready to?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, this is Michelle Buse, Assistant Attorney General. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak to you and present this issue. The State Charter School Board provided notification to you, the State Board of Education, on February 6th that it had authorized new replication or satellite charter schools for Freedom Preparatory Academy, Ascent Academy, and Wallace Stegner Academy. Although the State Board of Education does not approve or deny the authorization of charter schools, by statute, you do have the authority to direct an authorizer to reconsider an action to authorize a new school and correct any deficiencies in the authorization process's compliance with laws or rules. Under this authority, in your March meeting, you directed the State Charter School Board to reconsider its action and provide evidence that the threshold requirements in your Rule R277552-6 had been met by each of these schools to apply to open new replication or satellite schools. Specifically, concerning to board members in the discussion were whether the schools were each meeting or exceeding the required academic standards, whether they were complying with all laws and rules, and whether they were in compliance with their charter agreements, as the documentation that was provided by the State Charter School Board indicated that Ascent was meeting 5 of 16 contractual goals, Freedom Preparatory Academy was meeting 2 of 5 contractual goals, and Wallace Stegner was meeting 1 of 6 contractual goals. The State Charter School Board reconsidered their action in their March meeting and once again authorized the 3 new schools and provided a response to your request for reconsideration. You will find this under the Title 6A, Process of Reviewing Eligibility Requirements for a Satellite or Replication, in your backup documents. At this time, you have the option to either take no action and allow the new schools to be established, or to once again ask the authorizer to reconsider its action and correct identified deficiencies in its process of approval. With that, I will turn it over to you for discussion.
Okay, thank you, AAG Buse. Questions from board members?
Board Member Lear.
Yes, I'm sending my video, and I'm sure you can hear me. I'd like to divide the motion on the 3 schools so that we can consider each of them individually: Ascent, Freedom Academy, and Wallace Stegner.
Second, or approve without whatever it's called.
I would just comment that there's no motion on the table currently, so
Yeah,
we
so
can't
we're not-
take a motion to divide.
Before we take motions, are there any questions of what's been presented by AAG Buse?
Board Member Scott Hansen has a question.
Okay, Member Hansen.
In reviewing the process of reviewing eligibility requirements, I have some areas which I believe should be identified as deficiencies or points for clarification. First, under the requirements of federal and state law, regulations, and rule, I don't see any listing of what items are confirmed. This
Board Member Hansen, I think we're losing you.
Let me shut off the video and see if that helps. You hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. First, under item number 1, I think that we're missing at least some idea of what was confirmed to show that the school is satisfying federal and state law regulations and rule. Also, on B1B, say there are no known unresolved and material compliance issues. I don't know what the materiality level is, and I'm not sure why non-compliance with open and public meeting laws was considered to not be material. So I would like to have that answered. On number 2, the charter school has operated successfully for 3 years, meeting the terms of its charter agreement. The rule is clear that schools need to meet the terms of their charter agreement, but we have Wallace Stegner meeting 1 of 6, Freedom Prep 2 of 5, and AAU 5 of 16. And I don't see any discussion of that in the process sheet that's been given to us. I also had questions on number 3, looking at Ascent Academy in particular. It looks like the charter school board has focused on one of their campuses, and it looks like 2 of the campuses have critical needs when I looked at the school report cards. I'd like to hear the charter school boards or have them elaborate on why they focused on just one campus and not taken an average or looked at these other campuses that aren't doing as well. Those are the deficiencies, I guess, that I would point out, and I'll wait for other discussion before I make a motion. Hello?
Board member Belknap has a hand up there.
I'm sorry, did you say me or Laura?
Laura.
Okay.
I actually agree with Scott. I've written down some of these same questions that when some of these schools are receiving quote, I'm not sure exactly what the term is, but 1 of 6, 5 of 16 of their proficiencies for what their charter agreement is. I don't see where we have a listing of if they've improved, if they're ready. And I believe that these schools are supposed to, moving at this fast pace, should be prepared and ready and be quote unquote even better than some others if we're moving this quickly to move them on to make a satellite.
Chair Huntsman, are you still on?
Yeah, I'm still on. I just turned my monitor off to see if that made any difference, but it didn't. So, any other questions?
Board member Lear.
I thought I would save these comments, but I have some of the same concerns that board member Hanson does. I agree that I do not think, well, that I think that compliance with the Public and Open Meetings Act is a material concern. I don't think it should be limited to a governance concern. One of the specific concerns about that relates to the Open and Public Meetings Act is if that is not satisfied, which has not been satisfied with 2 of the schools, is that anyone looking at their looking for information about their approval of a school fees schedule would not be readily apparent. It also would not allow one to see who the board members are who would be then meeting and responsible for the work of the school. So I think that is a material concern when that is out of compliance, and it just on its face is clearly out of compliance on at least 2 of the schools. There are other issues that, and I'm not sure where the best place to say this is, but the process, even as laid out, even as it's presented to us as the existing process, I think presumes that it is applied to the facts of the school. I don't think we can just say that the process is working without applying it to information we have about the school. And that seems to be what the charter board is urging us to do. And I can't agree with that. I think we have to actually impose the process. And I think it's a presumption that is a very logical one, although yes, it could be spelled out better. But a logical presumption is to say that the process is applied to the facts that we have. And that has to be satisfied in order to be, those facts have to meet requirements, law, board rule, their own contractual goals in order for them to be exemplary schools and then proceed to be replicated or allowed to have a satellite. Thanks.
Before I
Chair,
go ahead,
okay. I was just going to ask if I could speak.
you bet. And I wasn't going to seek a motion or anything, but Vice Chair Cummins.
Okay. Yeah, and I know we don't have a motion on the table, but I guess some of the questions that I had as I read through this, and our place in this is to send back based on process and things that are occurring. And I would agree with the statements that I've said earlier. The information that we've been provided as board members doesn't show enough evidence that the process seems to have been followed. Whether or not that took place or didn't, the evidence we have only shows us that there were deficiencies in the charters, but it didn't show us why and how that was considered, or if there was reasoning why they passed it anyways. And so for us and the information we even had before us, it just looks like the process wasn't followed. And so that's why I think it's important that we, as we go through this, that the State Charter School Board recognize that whatever they sent to us is very explicit in showing that all of everything took place and what was considered and why.
So before I take a motion, I guess I want to go back to AAG Buse's comments here, and that is the challenge that's a little bit before us right now is again is process and not really the compliance side of these three schools. And we haven't been in the business to take one school at a time and say, oh, they're in compliance. They're in 100% compliance with state and federal rule. And so we're kind of going to that space a little bit on the things of our own concern and or our own separate investigations into what looks right or what's not present on websites and etc. And so it's as we move forward on this, board members have individual concerns based on their own investigation and insight into the schools that is somewhat unique and in a unique place that we haven't been before. And so our actions of accountability in that is it goes to refers back to the state charter board. So my question is to AAG Buse, are we, as we move forward on our accountability, and request to the charter board on their accountability, are we in the right space right now for calling individual items out per school, or individual concerns that we have for each school? Are we in the right?
I think that it's probably a little easier worded the way that board member Cummins stated it, that we need more clear evidence that each of these schools qualified under the criteria, that sufficient evidence wasn't provided, that each of those schools qualified under each of the criteria, that there may have been considerations by them, but evidence wasn't presented to the board that showed that they were complying with all of the laws, especially when there's evidence that's apparent that they're not, or evidence that they're complying with the terms of their contract, when the evidence provided by the state charter board clearly showed that they're not complying with the terms of their contract. And the second round of evidence simply said, we reviewed their contract, didn't provide additional evidence to show why that was accepted. And they were still allowed to apply, because that's one of the threshold requirements in the rule, is that they have to be complying with the terms of their contract or agreement. So I think that the general process, as Board Member Cummins stated, would be the justification for sending it back, rather than the specific faults of each of the charters themselves.
Well, thank you, because I want to keep us in the right space for the situation. And this is a new place that we're in, based on a rule that was passed a couple of years ago. And I about thought I lost my computer. I'd have been in trouble. Any other questions before I take a motion?
Next up is Mike Haynes.
Okay, Board Member Haynes.
Thank you, Chair. As you know, I sit on the State Charter Board as the USBE's liaison, and I had the opportunity to sit through the presentation from all three of these schools to the State Charter Board, as well as seeing some of the additional research and information that went on through this review of eligibility. I was impressed with what they were able to do, and witnessed the unanimous vote to approve these three, knowing what their role is as a state charter board, and the additional work that went on behind the scenes that maybe was not presented here. I'm going to vote to support the expansion based on their role as a charter board to review this appropriately and make those recommendations. And I'm going to trust their recommendation on this one. I feel like that they did a good job, again, reviewing the data they had, and it may not be here, and maybe we can get Director Lambert to clear up some of that before a vote is taken, but I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Okay. Vice Chair Cummins, is there? I think
Yes,
Jennifer Lambert, go ahead. Vice Chair, I didn't hear you.
Jennifer Lambert has her hand up to speak, and then we have some other questions from board members.
Okay. Let's invite Jennifer Lambert onto the conversation. Charter Director.
Okay, she's unmuted.
Hello, thank you. This is Jennifer Lambert, Executive Director for the State Charter School Board. Thank you for letting me answer some of these questions. I want to first point out in the minimum standards are for whether or not we should accept an application, not whether or not they should be approved. So what the rule right now is asking, and some of these things are very much judgment calls, but it's asking for staff to decide whether or not the application should be accepted or rejected before it even is heard by the board members. And so I do have to say that if there is a judgment call that could go either way, as staff, we give deference to allow the schools to be able to present to the board and make their case, and we present the information to our board. First thing, I think there was a question about the standard for under number 1, which was about that they satisfy federal and state law, regulations, and rules. What we did is we asked all of your staff, the departments, if there was any concerns that they had We did not receive anything that there were concerns. We also looked to see if there were any open audits that were not resolved. We did not see any. We also reviewed our own data about if there's any unresolved complaints. We did not find any at that time. And as in terms of the open and public meeting, you're looking at under the statute 52-4-203-4G. In there, it talks about making available minutes and meeting recordings. And there are differences in how some schools interpret what is make available. We, of course, would interpret that they should be posting on their website, but we know that some schools, and their attorneys back them up on this, say that they just need to be able to make it available when someone requests that. And so since that's kind of more of a judgment call of whether or not they're in compliance with the law or not, we left that to our board and to be able so that the schools could present and answer any questions to the board members. And as far as I think there was another question about the second one in terms of have they operated successfully for at least 3 years, meeting the terms of the charter agreement. What we look at is what's called key elements. And we pull out the key things from their charter agreement that they said they're going to do. We're not looking at goals there, we're looking at the key elements. And in all 3 cases, we feel that the schools are in fact, doing, holding to their missions and doing what they said they would do. In terms of number 3, again, there's different ways that maybe you could look at that and judge that, but because we were looking at this as staff, whether or not they should be allowed, the schools be allowed to present their case to a board in an open meeting and be able to make their case, we gave deference to the more lenient way of interpreting that because we did not want to administratively interfere with the school's due process. And I hope that answers the questions that members have.
Okay. Thank you, Jennifer. Vice Chair Cummins, is there other hands up?
Board Member Cindy Davis was next.
Board Member Davis.
Hi, this is a question for our AAGs. Or maybe the chair, I don't know. I'm just wondering if we need a motion for this. If we remand any of the schools back to the State Charter School Board, board members gave a good idea that a committee would be formed between 2 State Charter Board members and 2 USBE members to go through some of this information. A different State Charter Board member suggested to me last night that if that committee was formed, that they be required as part of their work to give suggestions back to the State Charter School Board, that they be required to listen to or watch that session where the State Charter Board interviewed these 3 schools. And then maybe that committee could summarize some of that rich narrative that Board Member Haynes is referencing for the rest of the board to be added to those pieces of data in question. So my question is for either the chairs or the AAGs, do we need a motion to put something like that into motion? Or is that just a suggestion that can be made for working behind the scenes if we do remand these schools?
This is AAG abuse. That's not in a rule, so it's not something that I can actually answer to. If that's something that you as a board wanted to direct to do, that's something that you as a board could discuss, but that's not something that's in rule.
So which would end up, because, yeah, it's not in rule. This is Chair Huntsman. It's not in rule. So it would take a motion to form a committee, but at the same time, we are going through what we call the process. in committee starting tomorrow. We have the existing process that led us to where we're at today. And to the fact that we've got questions on with our authorizer on their due diligence and evidence and a submission to us of showing compliance and et cetera, that that process is going to be completely, most likely changed the way that I see it as it comes out of committee, and I'm not sure how many committee meetings, and then the process is going to change. And so right now what we have before us is the old process, and there's three proposed extensions here where they're looking at, building, spending money, getting ready for their campuses, and those three schools are waiting, watching us have this particular debate and a variety of motions back to the charter school. So a committee or whatever that's, that can be voluntarily done if the charter school or the charter board wants to have one. But the hope is a little better process that will streamline this so that when recommendations come to the board that we either this is on the policy, or on the policy itself, that we have assurances that compliance is being met and et cetera. So I'm not sure what will benefit Member Davis by having this committee vetting out these three schools. The reality is that the charter board doesn't need our approval of this. Is that, let me just make sure that that's a correct statement. So I'll ask AAG views. Is that a correct statement?
Yes, it's kind of an interesting conundrum because you as a state board do not get to approve or deny it, but statutorily you can send it back if you feel like somewhere in the process the authorizer did not comply with the process. So you do not get to approve or deny their action, but you can make them reconsider if they skipped something in the process.
So where we're at is if there's 8 or more board members that want it sent back because of the process, then that's what's before us today. If there's less than 8, then this just moves forward. So the really what's before us is the process, not really the 3 schools. So we are in a very odd place. I don't know if that answered your question. So I'm, as a chair.
Can I just follow up?
Yeah, but just as we found, as a chair, knowing and also visiting with the AGs, what's in statute and what's in rule, I'm trying to keep us in the process space because that is where we're supposed to be, and again, with an opportunity to better that process starting tomorrow in committee. Follow up, Board Member Davis.
Yes, just to follow up to clarify, I think we are going to see changes in our process, and I think we need to do some things to adjust on our end. But as we do those things should negate a need to have a committee like this. So I think just the concerns today have been expressed about this current process. And so that was the suggestion toward this. In case of a remand, this suggestion was made by folks on the state charter school board. I do want to clarify that is for this past process, not for a future process to come.
Yes, and I've the opportunity to form a committee or whatever to come out of the committee tomorrow as in the form of a motion to the board, depending on the work that you do as the committee is doing tomorrow. So that's where I see the best work on this, right? Right now, I just see process that's before us today. And if I've seen language, and I think a lot of, I believe a lot of the board members' concerns would be answered if the motion was, if there's 8 or more that wants to send this back to the state charter board, is to provide the extra evidence or additional evidence that wasn't submitted regarding goals and some other issues. This is your meeting. So is there any other questions before we get to any proposed motions?
We have a few board member questions, as well as AAG Brian Christenberry has his hand up.
So who should I go with first in there? Brittany, I'm not seeing the hands.
If you'd like Brian to speak to something, and then we can go with the next board member, who is board member Lear.
Okay. Brian, AAG Christenberry.
Yes. Thank you, Chair and Vice Chair. Something that Board Member Davis mentioned there with this kind of this hybrid committee idea, just got me thinking. And so I just want to provide this as an option, which obviously you can disregard, but it's something to think about. Perhaps, what do you think about the idea of having a committee tomorrow add this to their agenda for kind of a deeper dive? They can take feedback and input from community members or staff or whatnot, and they can deliberate and provide a recommendation. I don't think it's too late if that would be helpful. And this kind of goes off of what Board Member Davis was saying. I think some time is somewhat urgent here to push this down the road. Months may not be the right course of action, but just this thought occurred to me of using one of our committees tomorrow to work on this issue.
Well, appreciate your comments there, and there's a couple things that can happen. There's that, and also if there's more than 8 members that have these concerns, is while that's taking place, still have the state charter board address in their submittal back to us more information regarding these board member concerns, and especially a focus on the goals. But again, that's another motion. Board Member Lear.
Thank you. I know that this is on the committee discussion tomorrow. I personally don't feel like we can add another item to our committee, but I think that this idea of a possible conference committee or liaison committee or something may come up as part of the process discussion tomorrow. So I would like to keep that in the future discussion. Secondly, I'm totally about the space of process. I understand that, but a process that doesn't presume you apply the process to the facts at hand is no process at all. So can it be more stated in a more crystal clear fashion? Absolutely. But I also think it's very fair to presume, even with the given process, that we don't have the evidence before us that the criteria. So I feel very strongly that I can't proceed with these schools. These are supposed to be exemplary schools by the state charter board's own language at the very end of the application. The evidence we have does not present these as exemplary schools. And they are allowed now to go through an expedited, abbreviated process. If you looked at the materials carefully, you see that they get considerable funds right out of the chute to be replication schools. I cannot feel fiscally responsible in approving these schools approving the process that approves these schools or accepting the process that approves these schools without the evidence that maybe the charter board received, maybe it didn't. It's kind of surprising to me that if the charter board had it, it didn't provide it to the state board, because it would then provide support for the process, even the existing process for this board member. So I believe that it is implied in any process that the information acquired through the process is also part of the discussion and part of what's relevant. And we have not seen that.
Okay. We have a couple other.
There's two more hands up, and then I would like to add, I can't help put my hand up, but I'll just add myself to the queue at the end, if that's okay.
Okay. Okay. Two other questions,
Okay,
comment.
Board Member Scott Hansen, and then Board Member Earl.
Okay. Board Member Hansen.
Thank you. And I agree that this is about the process, and I think that the process somehow has to give us the same warm feeling that Member Haynes had from attending the meetings. I know that we can't condense everything that happens in a several-hour meeting into a piece of paper, but there needs to be some evidence of the considerations that were made, especially when there's some clear requirements in the rule that don't appear to have been met. I also just had one comment on the sheets that we received. This is the proposed replication sheets that have the blue on them. We have one for each school, and on all of them, I believe there's some yellow highlighting, which I believe designates some non-compliances or areas of concern. And then at the bottom, the SCSB staff recommendation on every one of them says staff recommends only replicating charters that are high performing in all areas, which to me is no recommendation at all. I don't understand what that means. Is this school recommended for replication or not, is what I want to see at the bottom of that. So I'd ask that that be included as well in any motion to remand for more evidence. Thank you.
Okay. Board Member Earl.
Yes, I guess if I'm listening to this dialogue, I'm trying to understand the balance between, and kind of like what Scott said, whatever we receive should be compelling enough that it endorses whatever we're receiving from the charter school board, similar to Mike Haynes, what he is articulating. But at the same time, there is a balance between, well, are we going to have them come and present all that information to us then? You know, so yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out in my mind where that balance is between, and as you've talked processes, are we wanting to change the process? Well, they have already gone through a process, did they go through the full process or not? So I'm just telling you where I'm trying to balance this out in my mind. And yeah, anyways, those are just my thoughts.
Okay. Vice Chair Cummins.
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion if that's okay, and then speak to the motion.
Well, you're the last hand up, so that's been raised on this. So,
Okay.
Yes.
I'd like to move that the board send to the State Charter School Board for reconsideration, as stated in UCA 53G-5-205 4B, applications filed by Freedom Preparatory Academy, Ascent Academies, and Wallace Stegner Academy to open new replication satellite charter schools, and request that they correct deficiencies in the charter school application by applying the deficiencies in the applications and the process by applying the criteria found in R277552-6, parentheses 2, and provide evidence that the applicants each met the minimum criteria to submit an application for replication or charter schools.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. And I kind of have it partially on my screen, and I can't get rid of that. Hopefully I can restate this.
It's different than the,
Yeah.
it's a little bit different than the proposed motion that was on screen.
I have a zoom out, zoom in thing that's covering part of this. I wish trying to drag it away or move it, and it won't. Maybe it will go to sleep here in a sec. So, okay. Discussion there's a motion and a second. Discussion to the motion. Vice Chair Cummins, is there some hands up?
Yeah, do you mind if I speak to the motion?
Oh, yes, please speak to the motion. Sorry.
I think the conversation about having a committee work through this is a little bit difficult. I think we just need to be very clear in our motion because we're talking about the process. We don't want to get into the weeds of every little thing. There's some discrepancies in the documentation that we received from the State Charter School Board. One saying we recommend them as in full standing, and then the other documentation saying that they're only meeting 3 of 16 goals, etc. And so because we don't have clarity in the documentation, we cannot assume that the process was followed based on the documentation. And so I think it would just be important for us to just say, we need clarity. We need a specific recommendation that says, here's the process, here's how we followed it without the discrepancies, and then allow them to do their work and not with us, talking about all the little things that we're finding. Those little things are important as we see the differences that between what we would expect and what we actually see, but it's not part of our motion to say, here, we want this in this application to be changed or this, but them to show the evidence that they followed their process. And I'm gonna paste my motion in the chat box. Anyway, that's all I had to say. And then we have board member Lear has a comment.
I think Scott had a comment also. I'd like to hear what he said before I speak. Is that okay?
Is Board Member Hansen's hand up?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Board Member Hansen. Board Member Hansen.
Sorry, there we go. I'm sorry, I'm having some lag on my end when I mute and unmute.
Board Member Hansen.
Speak in support of what Board Member Cummins just said, in that as the Charter Board goes through this, it sounds like they've made some well-reasoned decisions, but where they are exercising discretion and there isn't a clear compliance with the law, I think that we need some evidence or explanation of why they did that, so that we can approve and move this thing forward. I'd also like to, maybe without objection, amend the motion to express our intent that this come before this board in our next meeting, which I believe should be in 2 weeks. So I'd like to move this forward as quickly as we can, contingent on the Charter School Board being able to respond to us.
So I know you want to make an amendment, but I think there's this opportunity for them to act in a very timely fashion, because there's a lot of pressure on them also with these 3 schools. And so I hate, I don't want to speak to having additional amendments or other caveats. They've heard the discussions of today's meeting, and I think this is very well stated as Vice Chair Brittany Cummins put this motion forward. I just don't want to put, I did speak against putting a timeline on it. I think they'll act responsibly on this because time is pretty important.
As long as it's understood that this board will certainly be ready and willing to consider it in our next meeting on an expedited basis. Thank you.
Board Member Lear.
And my final comment, I've said a lot. I know about this, but I've done a lot of research also about this. And I don't see Brittany's motion, Vice Chair Cummins' motion as very different than the original motion. But my emphasis is on evidence, existing process going forward. The state board, having responsibility for all public schools, needs to see evidence that a process was applied. And so I want to emphasize from my position that part of the motion. That is what we looked for in previous motions, and it still did not come forward. And so I'm looking for that and we review this. And I don't want this to be an ongoing cycle of remanding. But I'm sorry to be harping on it, but unless there is evidence that these are exemplary schools, high schools, as the charter board itself states, are the schools that it wants replicated, then I cannot abide or accept a process that does not prove that. And that would come through the data and evidence. So thank you for letting me speak so often on this.
Okay. Any other hands up?
Board Member Davis.
Board Member Davis.
I'll speak to the motion and appreciate what's been said. And Brittany, I agree with you, or Vice Chair Cummins. And I also appreciate Chair Huntsman's clarification that should the state charter board want to convene a small committee as part of their preparations that includes some of our board members, that is an option up to them and that they can work forward in that manner as well. So I will speak to the motion and thank you.
Vice Chair Cummins, am I ready to call this to a vote?
It looks like it. I don't see any additional hands.
Okay, the motion before the board is that the board send to the state charter school board for reconsideration as stated in UCA 53G-5-204 parentheses 4 parentheses B, applications filed by Freedom Preparatory Academy, Accent Academy, and Wallace Stanger Academy to open new replication satellite charter schools and request that they correct deficiencies in the charter school application by applying the criteria found in R277-552-6 parentheses 2 and provide evidence the application that the applicants each meet the minimum criteria to submit an application for replication in satellite schools. This is going to be a roll call vote. I'll start with Member Belknap.
Aye.
Member Bolter.
Aye.
Member Cannon.
Aye.
Vice Chair Cummins.
Aye.
Member Davis.
Aye.
Member Earl.
Aye.
Member Gravitt.
No.
Member Hanson.
Aye.
Member Haynes.
No.
Member Lear.
Aye.
Member Marsh.
Aye.
Scott's not on. Member Newell.
Aye.
Member Thorpe.
Aye.
Member Huntsman. Motion passes. Thank you, board. Okay, moving on.